Pop quiz hotshot. If I were to ask you what the most common way for a web application to get input from the user is, what would you say? If you'd said forms, then you are absolutely and completely wrong. The actual most common way to get input from a user into a web application is simply through the use of hyperlinks. There are far, far more hyperlinks in use on the web than there are forms. Hyperlinks can be great. They let a user do things like say, please show me this data, please let me access that page, please let me activate this function. But when it comes to getting more complicated input from the user, hyperlinks become unrealistic. For example, here in this file, I have a little form that I've put together, and what this form does is it asks for the user's first name, and it asks the user to select their height, for which I've given them 3 options, tiny, average, or huge. Now, for something like this select component where I'm asking for the user's height, using a hyperlink there would work. I would basically just need 3 different links. The user could click the link for tiny, the link for average, or the link for huge in order to select how tall they are. But for something like the first name, how could we possibly use hyperlinks in order to do something like that? To get a first name, there are so many different possibilities, almost an infinite number of different possibilities. Doing something like that with a hyperlink is simply unrealistic. And trying to get these 2 pieces of information together, both the user's first name and their height, again, is just not something we could do with hyperlinks. So forms are what we're going to need. Forms are something that, of course, HTML lets us create. You should already know about the markup that's required for creating forms and the different form controls that actually allow the user to interact with the form. These are things you should know from previous experience from an HTML class you've taken. In HTML itself, though, forms, I always thought when I was learning them originally and when I've taught them since, always seemed a little bit strange because you learn about these things called forms in HTML, which are themselves not uncomplicated. There's a lot to them. But in HTML itself, there's really nothing you can do with them. You just create a form sits there on the page, and that's it. It's functionally inert. When you learn JavaScript, forms start to take on a little bit of life in that you can use JavaScript to interact with the different components of a form, so it's a little bit nice in a way, but still forms don't really seem to fulfill the actual promise of what they're supposed to be. You can kind of see that in the required attributes for the opening form tag, action and method. Well, those 2 things have to be there, but in JavaScript, those 2 things are virtually irrelevant. Here in PHP, forms, I think, really come into their own. Here in PHP, we're going to be able to see HTML forms actually do the things that they are meant to do, the way that they are meant to do them. What I have here in this example is I have a form that I've created on a page. You can see that I've left the action and the method for the form empty for the time being, so we can talk about them. In the form, I have a field with associated label where the user is supposed to put in their first name, and a field with associated label, a select component actually, with its label, where the user can select their height. Down at the bottom, I have a submit button to actually submit the form. Now, the action and the method attributes for forms, what are those actually? The action attribute simply specifies when this form is submitted, essentially when the user clicks the submit button, where is this data supposed to be sent? Now that we've started talking about HTTP requests in PHP and PHP's ability to be able to receive GET requests and the data associated with them, that might start to give you an idea of what this action method can actually do. What we can do with this action attribute is we can actually put in the name of a PHP script, and it'll be that PHP script that receives the data that is sent in from this form. So I have a second PHP file here that I've created simply called show_values.php. There's nothing much in it right now. We'll come back and fill it out here in a minute. But that's the page that I intend to have be the receiver for the data that's sent in from my form. So it's the name of that page, show_values.php, that I'm going to put in for the action of this form. That's where the form's data is going to go. The method attribute for a form lets us specify how the data will be sent. The how corresponds directly to our HTTP request types. What we can do here with method is we could say, for example, that we want this to be a post request that's sent, or we can say specifically that we want this to be a get request that's sent. Here for the moment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just use get. We'll switch that over to post here in a minute or two and see the effects. So I have a complete form now, all ready to be filled out by the user. The browser will know where the values from the form are meant to be sent and how to actually send them based on the action and method attributes. If I jump over to my browser now and actually take a look at my form, this is what it looks like, and I could go ahead and fill it out. For the first name, I'm going to put in Victrola, and for height, I'm going to choose huge, like a tree. When I now actually click Continue, which is the Submit button, that data submits over to my page called Show Values. Well, where's the data? I don't actually see it. Like I mentioned before, my Show Values page right now is functionally blank. I haven't really done much of anything with it, but that's okay. There's still something interesting here to see. If you look up at your address bar, you can see there that in the address bar, you have first name equals Victrola and height equals tall. Well, how did that stuff get there? Well, if we go back and we take a look at our form itself, first name is the value of the name attribute of the text field. Right? That becomes the actual name of a URL parameter that's automatically constructed by the browser. Right? The value that's assigned to it, Victrola, is the value that the user typed into the field themselves. You can probably then guess, height, where did that come from? Well, if I come over, look at my select component, its name attribute has a value of height. That's where the name of that URL component came from. The actual value that was assigned to it, tall, is the actual value of the option attribute that the user selected when they submitted the form. So functionally what's happened here is that when I have a form that's put together and it is set to use a GET request, set to send the data as a GET request, the form or the browser that the form is in knows how to automatically take the names of the fields from the form along with the actual data that the user selects and to take those pieces of information and to turn them into an actual URL parameter string. If I wanted to now be able to make use of that data, I could do it the exact same way I had done previously when we were submitting GET parameters through a URL, through a hyperlink. If I come over to my Show Values page, I can, let's say, put in a paragraph where I'll put in first name is, and then I could put in a set of PHP tags where I will echo $_get because we're sending a GET parameter, and the name of the attribute from the GET request that I want to receive is first name. I could then also put in a paragraph where I'm going to say height is, and just like above, if I want to access the height, $_get, and the name of the parameter I want to access from the GET request is the height. So if I put those two pieces of information in, refresh my Show Values page, it almost works. Up here in the URL, we can say first name equals Victrola, height equals tall. Here we ended up with the Victrola value coming in when I asked for the GET parameter first name. The height, though, isn't showing up. Did I make a typo? Let's come back over and see. Oh, no typo. What I did was I forgot to put the word echo in. If I put my echo in, go back to the browser, refresh again, there we go. Now the height is showing up like it's supposed to. So that looks like it's working well. What would happen now if I go back to my form page and I put in a different name? I'll put in Bernard and I'll say Bernard is of average height and I continue. I get Bernard in medium. So whatever data the user fills into the form here, it looks like that data is being marshaled, being gathered together and passed as part of a GET request, where we're then able to access and use that data in our PHP code. Very important. Let's jump back over to our form page now, and let's see what would happen if I instead set the method to post for my form. So I'm telling the form now to send the data associated with it as a POST request instead of as a GET request. This is a nice ability that forms have. A lot of things we do in the browser are going to be GET requests whether we like it or not. When the user clicks on a hyperlink, when the user types in a URL in the address bar, when the user selects a bookmark or a favorite, all of those things are automatically, without question, going to be GET requests. But with forms, we have a choice. If it works for the situation, we can tell a form to submit its data as a GET request. If it works in a different situation, we can select POST request instead. How would we make that decision? Well, one thing that might make us choose GET versus POST is whether there's any secure data or private data being gathered by the form. Think of a login form, for example, where we're asking for username and password, or a billing form where we're asking for credit card numbers. In those kinds of situations, we would definitely want to choose POST. If we were to choose GET, that sensitive information would become a part of the URL, could end up in the browser's history, other undesirable side effects that I talked about previously. With POST, however, while POST doesn't automatically make the request secure, it does at least take the minimal step of keeping that data from being visible in the address bar. It keeps it from becoming part of the browser's history. So it's not a perfectly secure option all by itself, but it's at least a first step in the right direction. Another situation that might make us choose GET versus POST would be based on how much data is being sent. You may, for example, have seen forms on the web where you actually select and submit files to be uploaded. Well, a file is a pretty decent chunk of data compared to a first name and a height or just regular little pieces of text like we're doing here. That data, that chunk of data that makes up a file, is simply too big to become a part of the URL. URLs have a maximum length that they have to fall below. So whenever we're going to have a large submission of some sort, especially if we're going to be trying to do something like upload files, which is something that we'll actually learn about later in this course, in those situations we have to choose POST. Other than those two things, the security, privacy issues, and the actual size of the data that's being submitted, you're pretty much free to choose GET versus POST as you would like. My personal habit is normally, unless I have a very specific reason for using GET with a form, I almost always just use POST as the default. What kinds of specific reasons might I have for ever using GET with a form? Pretty much only if I want the page that's being submitted to be bookmarkable. If I want somebody to be able to bookmark the page that the form is submitting to, and I want the bookmarked page to remember the data that was submitted to it, the best way to do that is by making your form submit using the GET request. All right, enough talking. Let's see how POST actually does here. I've made no change here on my forms page other than changing GET to POST here for the method of the form. If I jump back over to my browser now, refresh the form to make sure we're using the latest settings, I'm going to try using Victrola as the first name again, and I'm going to say he's tiny like a child. When I submit, when I get over to my Show Values page, I have notices, I have errors, essentially. It's telling me I have an undefined index first name, an undefined index height, lines 13 and 17. If I come over and look at my Show Values page, line 13 and 17 are of course the two lines where I'm trying to do my echoes, and in both cases it's saying it doesn't know first name, it doesn't know height. Well, hey, it worked before, what went wrong? Well, nothing really went wrong. What happened was back over on my forms page, I changed GET to POST. So those two pieces of data are still being submitted, but they're not being submitted as GET data anymore. As a matter of fact, if I come over and take a look at my Show Value page in the browser, you can see up in the address bar, those two values are not there as GET parameters like they were before. So where are they? Well, they were sent as part of a POST request. A POST request we can't really see in a browser the same way that we would see a GET request, but we can still access it from PHP. If we want to access data that's been submitted through POST, instead of doing $_get, we of course need to do $_post instead. So here when we access data from the request, we have to be specific. We should be specific about what the request type is. So if I say get the first name and get the height from the post variable, $_post, my show values page then goes right back to working again.